Hello, this is Jeff Rouse checking in again from Our Story Studios, where we're about to show you the latest episode of Martin County on TV. We urge you to take a look at the sponsors who made this show possible at the end of this show. They're the ones that made this possible, and be sure and thank them. Hope you enjoy today's show.
Hi, this is Lenny Tvedten. I'm the director of the Martin County Historical Society. Today we have a couple of special guests, Richard and Catherine Wollaston. And, you know, I detected somewhat of a British accent. Could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and what brought you to Fairmont?
Oh, well, we'd never heard of Fairmont until about February last year. And yes, you have detected a British accent. And we come from England. We live just north of London.
Right.
And about February last year, we started taking a bit of interest in my grandparent, my grandfather, particularly. And because I didn't know anything about him. And after a lot of research, which Kate, who's next door to me, did, because she did all the research on it, we found that my great-grandfather, Percy, had emigrated to Fairmont in Minnesota. And we didn't even know Fairmont, or even Minnesota, where Minnesota was, other than we knew it was a state in the USA.
And Percy was kind of a significant figure in the history of Fairmont, wasn't he?
Well, so we found out, but of course when we first looked at it, we didn't realise that at all.
But thanks to Lenny's fantastic museum and everything that he's put on the website, there was a lot of information. And Percy seemed like a real person, and especially when you sent us his photo.
Sure.
That really made a big difference. We read his whole story and the story of all his 13 children. We found out what happened to the grandfather, Fred, and what happened to all the others, where they went all over the United States. And Fred was the only one who ever returned to England, hence Richard is English, as they were pretty English when they were here still, I think, weren't they?
And Percy accomplished a lot of different things, but I think the thing he's noted for as far as historically significant, among other things, but the one thing I think is that he was the first mayor of Fairmont.
Yes. At an early stage, I think in 1878.
And I believe I read he was actually, when he was mayor, he was an English citizen.
Yes.
Which is kind of a unique situation as well.
It was an English colony at that point, wasn't it?
Right.
There were several other English gentlemen,
right.
Some of them with money. He set up a shop on the corner of, I think it said North Avenue and 2nd Street, but I can't quite place that in today's terms.
That would be correct. That would be kind of the main street of Fairmont, going north up to 2nd Street.
And he built a windmill, and he had a 460-acre farm, and he had a 16-room mansion overlooking Bud Lake, which was very splendid.
On Homewood Drive?
On Homewood Drive, yes. Right. Well, the house was called Homewood, wasn't it? I guess Homewood Drive came later.
Right. What are the most interesting things you found out about your research with Percy? What are some of the really key items or most interesting that you've come across? Or surprising?
I mean, just about everything, I think. I mean, having never known that I had a great-grandfather called Percy, and then having discovered so much about his life in the last year and a bit, he must have been an extraordinarily entrepreneurial and adventurous person.
Right.
The fact that he decided to come to live in Fairmont and make a new life for himself at age over 50 with 13 children, the youngest of which was aged 3, I think, is an extraordinary thing to do, and it just completely bowled me over when I heard about this. And then when he turned up in Fairmont in January or February, I knew it was pretty cold in this part of the world, but I thought he must have been completely mad. Strangely enough, having now come to Fairmont, I think I've just worked out why he came in January. And I think because he wanted to make sure he could plant his beans in, I assume, about May.
That would make sense, yeah.
So there we go. So what is the most important thing about Percy is his enterprise, his extraordinary bravery, bringing that, perhaps even more brave with his wife,
His powers of persuasion, I should think, as far as his wife was concerned. And he was involved in everything. He was on the school board. He was one of the founders of the Episcopal Church here, St. Martin's Episcopal Church, for which he gave quite a lot of funding. And I believe that he remained as a vestryman, or I don't know what you call it here. He was a lay minister to begin with, until they had a proper minister. And he was a good, solid churchman all his life, and brought up his children the same way.
And you were telling about a bank he was involved in that had some financial problems toward the end, and he did a very noble thing.
Yes.
I think that was what finally made me completely fall for Percy. Percy formed this bank, and I think ran it personally very successfully for many years. And when he grew old and frail, he moved on and he went and lived in Victoria in British Columbia. And he left the running of his bank to his son-in-law. And unfortunately, he didn't run it as well as Percy. And they made some very bad loans, and it went bust. Word got back to Percy, who was sitting in his dotage in his big house, because he'd built an equally big house in Victoria in British Columbia. And he could not stomach the thought of any of the creditors being unpaid. So he sold every asset he had in the world, including his fancy house, and he sent the money back to Fairmont, and every single creditor was paid.
That's an amazing thing.
And Percy died a poor man.
Poor man.
Having arrived here quite wealthy. And it was about 10 years after he'd left. He left here in 1896, so he stayed here 20 years. He made a big mark on the town in that time.
Right.
And it was in 1907 when the bank failed. So it must have been an awful shock to him in his old age.
Right, yeah. Well, that was a very noble thing to do.
I felt so proud of him. I immediately told all my children, and my grandchildren are too young to understand it yet, but they will know about Percy when.
Catherine, could you take just a minute and kind of relate how you contacted us, or how you first got the idea to come here to Fairmont?
Yes, well, I did a lot of work on Ancestry.com, and I also did a lot of plain Googling. And I think it was through Google that I found the Martin County Historical Society and all this information that Lenny had put up. Then I went on your website, I watched some of your videos, and I wrote to you and I asked if you knew anything more about Percy. That's when you sent me the photograph. And we just thought that it seemed so strange, so far away, that rather than sitting in England watching all the Americans come to find their heritage, we would do the opposite, and we would come to America to find our heritage. And in fact, we're going to go to British Columbia later in the year and follow up on the grandfather, who had a very interesting life. In fact, of all Percy's sons, none of them stayed here. I don't know that Fairmont was big enough to hold that many Wollastons, but this grandfather went away and became a district land surveyor in British Columbia. Another one became an accountant also in Victoria. A son-in-law rejoined the British Navy in Victoria, and the youngest son, who was 3 when he came here, Ned, he went homesteading in Montana. And his son, who was another Percy, third generation, wrote a memoir of that, which has been published, and it's called Homesteading. And we were able to get a copy from Amazon and read about that. That was pretty tough, because this was another case of buying land along a railway, which was going to make a lot of money very easily, but it turned out to be poor land. And it was
I think it was even tougher than Minnesota.
I think it was much tougher. They had a tough time.
When you came now the past week, you flew into Chicago?
We flew to Chicago.
And then from there, did you kind of trace Percy's journey?
Yes. Well, we knew that Percy had gone by ship to New York and then by train to Chicago.
You decided not to take the ship to New York, though.
No.
I wanted to, but It would have, in the modern world, it would have taken far too long.
There was a budget as consideration as well. But we flew to Chicago and we had a great day there just looking around. Then we took the train to La Crosse, which is what Percy would have done. And then we got out at La Crosse, stayed in a nice hotel and then got a hire car. But in his day, he would have stayed in La Crosse and then had to cross the Mississippi. And when he came in January, he would have had to cross the Mississippi on a sleigh because there were no bridges then. And then he got another train which took him as far as Winnebago, took all day. And then they would get out there and stay in it's called Winnebago City, but I believe there were just a few houses there.
Yes.
And then they had to spend a night there. And then they had to come in an open sleigh for 20 miles from Winnebago City, but it took all day. And arrived in Fairmont and found it to be a very small town at that time, but clearly one with great potential.
Sure. Well, having come from close to London and being in Fairmont, Minnesota, what's your impression of our city and area?
We went round this morning in this wonderful day in the sunshine, and we went to where Percy built his house, overlooking the lake. And I immediately thought, I know why Percy came here, because it was absolutely beautiful. And in some ways it felt very much like England in some ways. And then you look in a different direction and of course you see these big open what were prairies and we don't have such things in England. It's a very different to what I expected. Having said that, I think when you set out on a journey like this, you don't really quite know what you do expect. You have a vision of some way, but it varies from whether it's something like the Wild West, the cowboy films and sort of dusty places.
Yeah.
I thought, well, it may be like that, but there is an element of that. It's interesting to see how the streets are so wide here.
The whole town is very spacious.
Yes.
And we've seen some lovely homes as we've driven around, and we love all the colourful wooden houses, and it has a calm feel. Everybody seems very friendly. When we were in the restaurant with Lenny last night, every single person on their way out knows Lenny. We felt a very strong feeling of community, certainly as far as you and your wife Carol are concerned. You know a lot of people.
I'm also astonished how many churches there are in the place. Really? It's just, I've never seen so many churches in a relatively small town.
Yeah.
But
well, churches were key to community and still are, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I'm still trying to work out what all these people who live in these nice houses actually do.
Well, they must all make a living somehow.
They're clearly making a living, good living somehow, and it's not really evident from the town.
We've
Maybe we'll find out more later.
A day and a half. We've a long way to go.
Well, before we close, what was your career? What did you do as a profession before you retired?
I was a lawyer, and as was Kate. We were both lawyers, and we had our own law practice in a larger town than Fairmont, outside London, called Chelmsford, in Essex. So,
would that be like a suburb of London, or?
No, it's
a county town.
It's a county town of the area of the district, and it's a big town. The population's about 120,000. So it's just become, in English terms, a city. Actually,
sure.
We have to get fairly big before we become a city, and but it's a feeder town for London. There's a lot of people commute in from there. And it's very famous for cricket and for the invention of radio. Actually,
really?
Marconi factories were there, and they invented radio in the during the wars, just before the war.
Sure.
Marconi.
Well, I just mentioned one thing. When I first got the email from Catherine, I saw this fairly lengthy email, and I scrolled down and I saw England. Oh, I better reread that again. Then I got the whole connection with Percy Wollaston, and of course I replied, and fortunately they did come to visit, and we certainly appreciate your coming, your interest in Fairmont and Percy Wollaston, and it's just been a great experience for me, and hopefully for you guys too. So,
well, it has been an absolutely wonderful experience for us, and it hasn't ended yet, and we really have enjoyed it. I've just sent an email this morning to a friend of mine. I said this has been one of the most extraordinary trips that I've ever done, and it's a real pleasure. And Lenny,
Your welcome has been so generous.
well, everyone has. I mean, Lenny has been fantastic.
Well, thank you very much for coming, for visiting, and for the interview. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, nice to see you, sir.
What do you know, Jeff?
Nice to see you, for
It's
sure.
always a pleasure. We don't get across the street enough to
That's
say
right.
hi.
We're a long ways away, just clear across the street. Well, I'm glad you stopped by for a visit, and we
to
have
be
a
here.
few things that we want to talk about today and share with the folks about you and your career and what you're doing here in town. So, first of all, most people probably have a pretty good idea, but what is your position and such?
I'm the City Administrator Community Development Director. When I started with the city, I was the first Community Development Director. As time progressed, in 2002, I became the Assistant City Administrator, and when Jim Zarling decided to retire in 2012, told the council maybe I should do both jobs so we don't have to hire another person, save some money, so I stayed Community Development Director, City Administrator, much like Jim Zarling was Finance Director, City Administrator. Saved the city some money.
Very cool. So what is a little bit of your background? Where are you from and your family and such?
My background is both my wife and I are from Omaha, Nebraska. We have 2 children. They'll be 28 and 27. This summer, my first job out of college was with the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency, a lot like what people would look at in the cities as the Met Council.
Okay.
On the way over here, I was thinking to myself that 2020 is coming up. Wow. Well, when I started with the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency, they were doing their Omaha Transportation Plan 2020. And I thought, that's a long way out.
That's right.
Not anymore. I just sent the council out, or I will be sending the city council out a budget memo and for 2020.
Wow.
So
Doesn't seem possible,
that
does it?
ages myself a little bit, I think.
And what year did you move to town?
Mary and I moved to town in 1995. Mary and I and Jake and Libby.
Very cool. Very cool.
They were 3 and 4. And as I said, they'll be 28 and 27
Wow,
this summer.
time does pass, doesn't it?
It does, it flies.
How did you come to Fairmont originally?
I was looking to kind of change things up in my career with the planning agency. I was kind of pigeonholed in grant writing, that sort of thing. But I did a lot of what they call circuit riding. We were a 5-county, 35-city agency. And so I would go out and do various planning and economic development and personnel policies, ordinance writing for these smaller cities. And a headhunter called one day, Jim Bremmeyer, still is in Minnesota, still does some recruitment work, executive recruitment work. Mary and I were looking for a change. We've always liked, one of our goals was to be around lakes. We always liked the water and boating, and this opportunity came up.
Your original position that you were just sharing a little bit about, what were your responsibilities at that time?
At that time, the city council had, and the economic development group had created the community development director position. So my charges were community development, the building official and planning and zoning and that sort of thing. Housing, working with the HRA and housing across the city, and economic development.
And as you know, there's been a television show in Fairmont for over 25 years altogether.
There has been.
And I think you've been on that show, Hometown Focus.
Right. With Janet Ruth.
With Al
Travis.
Travis. And you and Jim were talking to Al Travis at that time about what was happening. And surprise, surprise, I got the footage right here. Do you want to see it?
Perfect. Yeah, let's look at
Let's
it.
take a look.
This is Focus on Fairmont. I'm here with Jim Zarling, Fairmont City Administrator, and sitting down with us now, Mike Humpal, Community Development Director for the City of Fairmont. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thank you. Good to be here, Al.
We're talking about the city coming up with their 3 goals. The City Council, the first one, water quality issues. The second one, updating our land use maps and reviewing the city's comprehensive plan. Sounds good. What does it mean?
Well, I think for a city to grow and
know where they're going. We have to decide where we've been, where we want to go, and how's our city growing. What we want to do is plan for the community's future with the citizens involved. So we put together a 22-member citizen panel along with the Planning Commission and Board of Zoning Appeals, and we're going to look at where we're going to grow in the next few years.
What you're talking about is like where the
everything
business district is going to be, where the new homes are coming in, and that sort of thing?
Right. Where do we think our industrial areas should be? Where is it proven we've seen most of our residential growth? You know, we build an average of 12 houses a year, so it's not huge growth, it's not big subdivisions, but planning for that and having it on paper and recognizing that it's not a stagnant document, that it should change over time as markets change and that sort of thing.
Now, you supply us with a bunch of statistics, and we've got a few of them, and I got to think this is the sort of thing you use to plan out what's going on.
One of the things, and a lot of these statistics come from a housing study we had completed. One of the things you want to look at is what's our population doing. You see it drop from an all-time high in 1980 to 1990, but we're on our way back with the 94 estimates, and we're hoping to grow about 1 or 2% over the next census, which is 10 years.
How do you get to these numbers? The projected is 11.9, the most ever then would be in the city of Fairmont by the 2020.
We used we had a consultant do our housing study, and they used a company called Claritas. It's a data company that reviews census. We had the state demographer and then census. Past trends, what's happening, what happened from 70 to 80, 80 to 90, and probably most important for Fairmont, what's happening between 1990 and 1994. Had a few bad years. Rural America had some bad years from 80 to 85 in there. The 80s were tough on populations, a lot of out-migration. Sure. I think we're seeing some of that coming back. Data's a little different in Fairmont, where we might be losing population in the county overall, but a lot of county residents moving into Fairmont, so you're going to see Fairmont's...
and I think we have some stats on just some of that. Let's see what they've got up next. We've taken out some interesting things. The median income in a family in Fairmont, 35. Minnesota median income, 36,000.
Right.
We're obviously a little low.
A little low on a state if we compare to a statewide average, but if you look at communities around us, Worthington, Bemidji, Marshall, Fergus Falls, where we have a median income of $30,068, which is only less than Marshall at $32,560. So comparatively, Fairmont's doing very well.
Okay, and we've got some more stats again that we found interesting. Number of houses per year, you brought that up.
Build 12, and I think what's important here is they're averaging about $132,000 a unit, excluding lot. But our average house is between $57,000 and $65,000, and if you have a home, your property tax for school district, county, and city would be about $765, which ranks 96th out of 125 outstate communities.
And that's where when you start comparing us with others, it really takes and gives you a shot.
Sure.
We have very low property taxes. And then I think this was a number I read and was really shocked by. The sales and use taxes, the amount of money that flowed from one person to another in our city, $316 million plus, almost 317. That to me was a remarkably large number, and it's disproportionate for the county. Do we have 3/4 of the county people here?
Yeah, we have just over 50%.
50% of the county live in Fairmont, but we get almost 3/4 of the revenue that takes place.
If you look at the number of businesses, 533 businesses in Fairmont.
Okay. So, and those all seem to be very positive numbers. If we're getting that much out of our county and we seem to be growing, that's all good things. Third goal you're supposed to be taking a look at, beautifying the city. What are some of the things you're looking to do?
I think one of that issue arose from looking at our entrance ramps from Interstate 90 into our community. How can we make them as attractive as possible to show people we're not just another interstate community, that we have beautiful lakes. Coming in on Lake Avenue has always been a bone of contention for people.
And as long as you bring that up, when we've got a video of some of this cleanup we're talking about, please continue on and we'll let that roll.
So I think looking at working with area businesses out there just to make the situation look a little nicer, a little more attractive. We don't want to just not only in Lake Avenue, but all parts of our community. And sometimes that takes some demolition to get to where you want to go. I think a great example has been the Welkin Hotel site on Blue Earth and 15, where it's torn down and regraded, redevelopment. And Fairmont has a history of doing a lot of good things with its redevelopment. banks downtown, where City Hall's at now. Good use of our TIF dollars, and a good, we're beautifying the community.
And we can say thank to Steve Frick. He's the one running the bulldozer, came out to give us some of that footage. If you haven't noticed, that is Fairmont Cable TV's backyard. We're cleaning it up as an example to show that these are the things people can do.
Now that was a great interview.
Well, I hope I'm a little more polished than I was back then, but
Well, you
I look the same, right?
You look exactly the same. Good job, Mike.
Sure I do.
There's a couple things that were discussed in that interview at that time. One of which is income, and the average income in Fairmont being about $30,000. I think you said $30,500. Any idea what it is now?
I think our average or median income's somewhere above 50, 55, somewhere in there. And as back in 1995, if you compare us across the state, we're probably a little low. But if you compare us with other like-sized cities out in outstate Minnesota, we're probably right in there, right in the middle.
Awesome. And you talked about taxes and property tax and such. What has happened with that?
Back in 1995, we were 96th of 125 cities. Today, we're just using, I think, 14 or 20 cities. We're about somewhere between the third and the fifth for the lowest. Over the last couple of years, we've had some major capital improvement things that we needed to do. So we had one year where our levy increased 12%, and our another year it was 9.3%. So those were a couple big years that moved us up. But what I want to say is, while our levies increased, a 12% levy increase doesn't mean that your taxes are going up 12%, because what we've seen is an offset in our overall market value of our community.
Sure.
So we're still low. We're still a bargain. And as I have one council member remind me, Mike, don't brag about low taxes, because what are we missing out on? I said, I'm not bragging. I'm saying we've got room to move up.
Oh, no.
And still be competitive.
And being a business owner and building owners, thank you.
Yes,
we like to see that.
Yes, and we like to see business owners and property owners continue to invest and increase that market value.
Absolutely. You also talked about beautification, and they were showing a couple. You were showing, and Al was showing a couple examples of some things that were being done 25 years ago. What's happened concerning that?
Well, and it's funny because we're right downtown across the street, and I remember sitting in. Gentleman that's left town but still has a lot of ties, Jim Hanslow, with Bank Midwest forever.
Sure.
Lives down in Arizona now, but we were talking about what we could do with the corner of Blue Earth Avenue and State Street, the old Wilkin Hotel, and there was a little exhaust pro type thing there, and the Gilbert Hotel, and would we ever see that grow and develop? Well, Bank Midwest has moved out of downtown, and they took down the old VFW building, and that was rebuilt. Gunther's is gone, and Quick Trip and Laundromat are there. Walgreens is across there, so that entire corner has changed. And if you go down the street a little bit, there used to be a Pomida building where Brian Greger started his pharmacy, and now he moved up to where the Laundromat is, and now that's Center for Specialty Care and Victoria Strait Crossing. So, and you could go down and look at Hy-Vee, you could go out and look at the interstate. There's two hotels that are new since then. We've got the Center Creek Commons subdivision, and could go on and on. But a lot of good things have happened.
And I've lived here 30 years. Okay. And even at 30 years, every time I drive down 15, I'm always amazed at the changes and how nice it looks, even compared to when I moved here.
Yeah, and it continues to change and evolve. We got to continue to look to what's the next change. What can we do to make our community landscape better, and we'll continue to do that. Walmart's and that whole development is out there. I said several years ago, in 2008, when Walmart was built, this will be like the south end of Hutchinson someday. With the 2008 recession that followed shortly after Walmart was built kind of helped us stall that project. But I think I'm confident it'll get going again, and I think over the next couple of years we'll see some development out on the interstate.
Okay, awesome. What would you say, Mike, is possibly the biggest surprise in your position when you started your position that you found challenging or rewarding or just different than you thought it would be?
Well, I think the community support overall has been great for the city and the city employees. They do a good job in everything they do on a daily basis. But I guess one thing that has changed for me when I moved here, Omaha, while Nebraska is a rural state and agriculturally based, I was from Omaha, and I thought that Fairmont would want to move away from agriculture and focus on the 3M type businesses and that. And what I found was our strength is really in our agriculture.
Sure.
It's value-added ag products like you see at our ethanol plant and Cenex Harvest States and at Devonish Nutrition, and the list goes on and on as to what we have. So I guess my biggest surprise was how that's evolved and how it's just been a great thing for the community.
Sure.
As you know, 600 acres of industrial development since 1998. CHS had 200 acres. The ethanol plant has 200 acres in Fairmont. And then, if people remember back when Verisun was creating the ethanol plant in Welcome didn't have enough money to pay the option. So the city of Fairmont paid the option, and then the city of Fairmont and Martin County paid the option on that property the second time until they finally located and purchased it, and then we were reimbursed by Welcome. So 600 acres of property and over $300 million in investment in that 4 miles from Welcome to County Road 39.
Impressive.
So, but I mean, it just is telling about what agriculture means to our area.
Mike, where do you see the city going today?
I see it continuing to grow and prosper. One of the things that we're doing right now, much like in 1995, we were taking a look at the comprehensive plan.
Sure.
We have a committee put together right now, and WSP Engineering and Planning out of Minneapolis is helping us with that. How do we see things changing? We're going to do some different transportation and street calming at the interchange at
Sure, right.
Blue Earth Avenue, and as it turns into Lake Avenue here. So what do we do with that whole Blue Earth corridor up to Highway 15? We always thought that would initially kind of convert to more business and retail, but it hasn't. So what do we do with a need for new housing? And infill is important. So we're not out in the cornfields plowing in new roads, streets, water, and sewer. How do we utilize what we have along that Blue Earth corridor that maybe just as Ken Kruger and Matt Tradeout did with that small apartment complex by the Fairmont Chamber of Commerce there? Is there more of that in store for Blue Earth Avenue? So we're talking about those things. What are our needs? Again, we want to continue to provide safety and housing. We have an elderly population, so how do we build housing that fits those needs? But we also have a younger population coming up that are looking for kids that are moving here with degrees. They've been in college towns. They want newer, nicer apartments, and how do we give them that? How do we keep people here? What I heard the other day was there's not enough housing for some of our folks that want to move out of their house and have a smaller house of their own where they don't have to take care of the yard or anything. So we're losing people to New Ulm and St. James and Mankato.
Obviously a big project, and we want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I really have appreciated the citizens allowing me to serve them for these years. It's been great fun. Mary and I plan to retire here or whatever the next chapter in life is, I guess. But we're not going anywhere. We love the lakes. We've got a lot of friends here. When Mary and I moved here, we'd been married 5 years. May 4th, we were married 29 years.
And your kids grew up here?
And our kids grew up here, went to school here.
Home.
Yeah, and one's moved back, just bought his own house the other day, so things are good.
Very cool. Well, Mike, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And perhaps we'll have you on again.
Anytime.
Thank you. Well, there you have it, another episode of Martin County on TV. And as we share with you those sponsors that made this show possible, remember, it's not just the past, but the present that tells our story.